Oh my gosh, what an amazing and wonderful crowd. I am so thrilled to see all of you and some really amazing and unexpected faces in here. This is fantastic. I am going to briefly introduce, if you've seen the introductory remarks, our Dean, Dan Martin, is going to speak first. I'll have to raise this microphone a couple feet, and then Charlie, and then I'll give a little presentation, and then lots more. Yeah, Dean, up to you, Dan.
Great, thank you. Golan said I had 30 seconds. I just want to congratulate everybody who's been involved with the studio. This is an absolutely remarkable effort, founded by Lowry Burgess and Brian Rogers back in the day. Many, many faculty members have been supportive and engaged with it. The work that it's been produced has been significant and inspiring. We are so proud of what we have here at Carnegie Mellon in this college, and deeply appreciate the commitment of all the faculty and the students and staff who've worked very hard to establish the studio and keep it going. It is an amazing laboratory for new ideas and new approaches, and we're so thrilled that its home is here in CFA. So congratulations, everyone. Thank you. Have a good time tonight. And don't forget to visit the retrospective. I'm sure you're going to hear this 3 or 4 times, but if you want to see the kind of work that's been done, the amazing work, be sure to get over to the Miller Gallery tonight. A full 30 years, Golan? Right. It's a remarkable set of achievements. Thank you.
Next up is Charlie White, head of the School of Art.
I'm going to adjust this down from Dan height. I have been here for 3 years, so I cannot speak to the complete breadth and scope, but I will tell you that from the outside, from across the country and around the world, it is a place like the Studio for Creative Inquiry that forms the meaning and the strength and the uniqueness of not only CMU, but the College of Fine Arts in general. To look around this room is to see people that are completely different from one another and all aligned towards imagining a future and a different idea about how to move forward. The Studio for Creative Inquiry operates like a Switzerland inside of this college and allows 5 distinct schools to pursue forms of collaborative research and innovative thinking in a way that almost no other university has. The fact that we have and have had a series of leaders, and I was telling Golan earlier that there are 2 ways of approaching this, looking at the amazing structure and the ability for a college to have a research hub that is non-curricular, that allows for these things to happen. And then from a kind of sci-fi standpoint, I see the studio as like a TARDIS, and I see the people who have led it historically as like doctors. And, you know, Golan is my Tom Baker in that sense, because that was a doctor I loved, and I got to come here with someone who was so inspired and so committed, not to his vision, but the vision of everyone in the college and what they could bring. So congratulations to everyone who is part of this history, and we are so lucky that we are able to look at 30 years and look forward and say, well, then soon we'll go to 40 and 50 and 60 years, and this will continue and stay part of the university and the College of Fine Arts. So congratulations.
Couple ticks down, here we go. Oh my goodness, welcome everyone. It's really a thrill to have you all here. They've been so wonderfully brief, and I wonder if I will be as well, because I'm going to sling a little bit of history. It's great to hear these metaphors like TARDIS used to describe the laboratory, because the studio is indescribable, and you know, it's a unit of enhancement for the college, but has very few equivalents around the world, let alone the United States. So when trying to describe it, one always sort of has to come up with all kinds of strange words, which you'll hear in my talk here tonight. Very briefly, so I'm just going to get started. Maybe we could dim the lights a little bit if it's possible. I wanted to show what the studio is, of course, much more than just a room. It's, of course, an enduring structure for supporting creative work. But the room is its heart, and here is what it looked like in 1920 as the library of the College of Fine Arts. So if you were curious what it looked like when it was the library. In 1960, the Hunt Library was created, and what's now the CFA 111, where the studio is located, became a kind of room of requirement for the college. It was a faculty lounge, and in 1985, it was turned into what then became the Center for Art and Technology, the precursor to the studio. And there's a few people here who were actually part of that, like Roger and others. The Center for Art and Technology was founded by Bruce Breland and Harry Holland. It did not live long. Unfortunately, it lasted from 1985 to 1989, and there's a lot of complex reasons why it didn't last, but the main one was that it was too narrowly conceived. The specific bridge between art and computer science is a strong one that we still have today, but it's not the only kind of work that turns out we needed in the college. And for more of our faculty, staff, and students to feel invested in such a structure, it had to be broadened from just the intersection of art and technology to something much broader that didn't even necessarily include the word art in it, oddly, right? But to creative inquiry. And that's how that happened. So this story here sort of tells some of that. I was recently going through all the old papers and to create a vitrine of artifacts, and came across the earliest history of the studio here. So in November 1989, the new Dean of Fine Arts, Lowry Burgess, gave a public lecture announcing the foundation of the studio. From its inception, the studio was conceived as a non-hierarchical, non-disciplinary space. He said, "It will be a multidisciplinary beehive." So this is alternative to TARDIS. All departments, graduates, and undergraduates will explore and study there. People in every department of the university and visitors will get this yeasting going to see where it leads us. Okay, sure, that works too. At the end of the following summer, in 1990, the studio announced its first group of artists in residence. In this article, the studio's founding director, Brian Rogers, describes how the studio was envisaged as a transmitter of experimental ideas, an incubator for linking us to the future, and as a development site for activities on the edge, a cultural free zone where the unnameable can be nurtured. So, when I took over the studio, it was an interesting moment. I took over the studio just as the previous dean was on her way out, and the new dean was coming in. And at that precise moment, in between the deans, I changed the mission of the studio. I'm finally letting the cat out of the bag and telling the secret. And when the new dean came in, he was like, "What's the mission of the studio?" And I was like, "Oh, it's this." And he's like, "Oh, okay." So it's a bit of a story finally being told there. But it was to support atypical, anti-disciplinary, and interinstitutional research projects at the intersection of the arts, science, technology, and culture. And it turns out to have so many connections back to what Brian Rogers and Lowry Burgess and others conceived for the studio 30 years ago. I should say, some people are like, "Golan, you've really been with the studio for 30 years? I'm like, "No, I'm 47, and it's been a marvelous 10 years, and I'm very privileged." So this is the official language now, somehow. But there's been some unofficial language. Earlier this year, when the studio was presenting documents for the Presidential Advisory Board, I came up with this in an email to a student, a former student. I was like, "Well, I'm trying to describe it to people who don't know anything about it. I'm like, disruption cocoon, or permission fountain, and I was like, I'm ready to go to the wall with weird anti-disciplinary neoplasm." And I think this one is actually really important to me, improbability engine, because I think as a lot of universities catch up with Carnegie Mellon and sort of say, like, people contact me and say, "How do we achieve interdisciplinarity? We want to get art and technology going together." Actually, I think that's actually not too hard nowadays in an age of interactive multimedia and the internet and computer graphics and so on. What's really hard is to make things that are improbable. And recently, Tom Hughes, our associate director, kind of shed new light on our mission when he was explaining it to a group of students in the School of Art, and he said, "Well, it's anti-disciplinary because the university does disciplinary things very well. And it's atypical because, honestly, the university does typical things very well. And it's interinstitutional because, that also is really hard to do. And that's really the kind of logic for how the studio exists. It exists to kind of fill in and fill these kinds of cracks and opportunities and potentials that can't be done in any other way. It's this loose piece. So you take the university, you pick it up, you shake it around, and it's that loose nut that's in there that's kind of like rattling around that allows you to do something new. So I took directorship in January of 2009. At the time, the studio looked like this. There's the old Center for Art and Technology sign. And this may not even be interpretable to some of you who are more recent, because there was a two-story structure in there that had been built in the mid-'80s by the Center for Art and Technology in order to house engineers working in complete mutual isolation with CRT monitors and landlines. And so there was like 12 cubicles in there, and there was only 5 feet of space between the windows and the walls. And one of the first things I did was I destroyed it with extreme prejudice in order to open it out as the space we know today. A place for conferences and congresses, for exhibitions, for guest presentations as part of our Sylvia and David Steiner lecture series and creative inquiry, for educational workshops, and most importantly, as a studio, as a place where we can make things together. I'm profoundly privileged to be the current steward of this laboratory, which has been the birthplace of not one, but 2 internationally renowned cyber-feminist collectives, Sub Rosa, circa 2000, and Deep Lab, shown here in 2014. A studio which housed the 9 Mile Run Greenway project, a 4-year effort aimed at the transformation of an industrial site, waste site, to a sustainable public green space. This was an artist-led, artist-prompted project directed by Bob Bingham, Ray Kokoto, and Tim Collins, which remains the site of the largest urban stream revitalization project ever undertaken by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and projects like Hayes Woods, which was initiated by Tom and Constance Merriman while here. These are projects which, forming the second largest park in our entire county. These are really important things that the studio has done, which house projects like Conflict Kitchen by John Rubin and Dawn Wileski, and artwork which looks a great deal like a restaurant, and which for 7 years brought Pittsburghers together over food from countries and nations and regions with which we were in conflict, by providing logistical and administrative support to a student project like Mimas by then graduate student Madeline Gannon, a giant interactive robot installed at the London Design Museum, to the Warhol Data Recovery Project, a retro computing initiative that brought together 5 local institutions and was seen by more than 1.1 billion people across 900 news outlets when we rediscovered or helped rediscover previously unknown Andy Warhol artworks and floppies from 1985, to the Moon Arc, which is scheduled to launch next year, conveyed to the moon in collaboration with the Robotics Institute, which will index humanity's existence and project our creative force into deep time for hundreds of thousands of years. So I'm profoundly privileged to be associated with these and close to 500 other projects, more than 300 of which have been made possible by the generosity of Ed Frank and Sarah Ratchye and their endowed grant program, the Frank-Ratchye Fund for Arts of the Frontier, which many of you here have been helped by. This has been essential fuel for us in zapping excuses and making art that explores the implications and aesthetics of the recently possible. So some thanks. I'd like to thank the studio's amazing staff, including Tom Hughes, Linda Hager, Carol Hernandez, and our newest addition, Bill Rogers, as well as its former staff, Marge Myers and Jennifer Brote, and to its former directors, who kept the studio alive during the previous decades. The studio has had an absolutely outstanding group of staff who manage an obstreperous, wildly heterogeneous, and constantly changing portfolio of projects. These often have unusual administrative requirements, engage with novel external collaborators, push the boundaries of social acceptability, and entail a diverse variety of rapidly evolving risks. In the course of their work, the studio's amazing staff have developed unique expertise in circumbureaucracy, unique forms of institutional knowledge, and versatile forms of problem-solving know-how that are not found anywhere else in the university. It's really one of the most important things that we do is what the service our staff provides. I want to extend my most heartfelt thanks to all of you here today, to current students and friends, and also to the studio's alums, former fellows and artists-in-residence, and affiliated students and alumni of all stripes, and especially those who've trekked out here today from across the country, and there are many. Your show of support is heartwarming and invigorating. This is the energy we will need to continue our work as agents of cultural change in the challenging decades ahead. There has been a great deal of change over the last 10 and even the last 30 years, but what's not going to change is that the studio will continue to give the water and sunlight, the oxygen, space, and permission that we need to work in the ways that our times demand. So, thank you. I want to conclude my lectures by thanking you again and just kind of announcing what the program is going to be. I believe deeply that sort of, who we are and what we are made by stories that are told across the campfire. And so I've invited 9 people to give incredibly short 2-minute stories about their time when the studio meant something to them. And after this, we'll get a blessing for the next 30 years by the studio's co-founder, Emeritus Professor of Art, former Dean Lowry Burgess. So please give it up for all these folks who are about to come, and I'm going to hand it off to Bob Bingham. Thank you.
Thanks, Golan. I don't know how I'm going to follow that. He talks so fast, I talk so slow. When he asked me to do a 2-minute story, I went, oh, Mark Cato reminded me a few minutes ago that he's never heard a 2-minute story out of me. So I cut it in half, and I cut it in half again. But thanks for all that great history, Golan, because it is an incredible place, and I don't have to cover all those points in there. And I was going through my hard drive, going, well, where am I going to land? 9 Mile Run? No, that would take too long. So I've been here since 1989. I came as a visiting artist professor, and I'm still here. So I just cranked my hard drive all the way back to 1989. And I actually have to put in a shout out. I didn't know Marge was going to be here. And she wasn't here in 1989, but I'm going to pretend she was. With Jen Brote, that she saved a lot of us a lot of the time and helped guide us through the whole process of working in the studio. Thank you. So I'm going to go focus in on a very specific story that will maybe shed light on what it was like in 1989 compared to the present. Brian Rogers, I had a meeting with Brian Rogers. I think we snuck a smoke in his office. And he said, come on, Bob, grab me by the arm, which he often did. Let's go down and see what's going on in the studio. And the door opened, I was pleasantly surprised to see this buzz of activity, but it kind of looked like a dance or a performance. But it was really Bruce Breland, a professor of intermedia, and the DAX group, and Matt Warbicon, who was I believe, a post-MFA student, and they were shoving pieces of paper into a machine and pulling them out, and everybody was bumping into each other. They were pinning up the sheets of paper on the wall and shoving more pieces of paper in the machine in this little cubicle, and it was fax art. Remember fax art? Right? Like as close to real-time communication as possible. And then I saw Artur Maddox, who I had been in an MFA program with in 10 years prior in UC San Diego, and chatted with him real quick, but he was busy faxing. And turns out they were sending art and receiving art from the Sao Paulo Biennial, right? Which was incredible. Right, does anybody do fax art anymore? I think we've obviously come a long ways past that. And so I imagine my time is up. 2 minutes goes fast. But I want to thank Golan and all his associates for driving it forward in a beautiful way, and may it live long into the future.
Maybe a word of explanation just to say Bob Bingham and our next speaker, James Duesing, were co-directors of the studio in the early 2000s, from 2000 to 2002, and rescued it from a deep financial hole. So I want to thank them for helping the studio exist where it is today, because if they hadn't put it back into the black, it wouldn't be here. And now, James Duesing.
Well, thanks. I was trying to remember the time when we were co-directing the studio earlier today, and that idea that it was very tenuous was very much in my mind. But the thing that struck me when I was looking through, again, I also had a file this thick, literally this thick, and then another one this thick on the studio, on paper, that we had this thing called the Microsoft Fellows that, so my story is we got a grant from Microsoft, and Microsoft decided they were going to have grants in creativity, and they funded us for a big amount. Maybe Marge probably still remembers. It was like $100,000 or $150,000, and we brought in some fellows, and so I spent the afternoon looking and seeing what the fellows were doing, who we brought in. Robert Atkins, before coming, was the founder of the Visual AIDS Project and the Day Without Art and the Red Ribbon Initiative. I don't know if you remember that. That was a red ribbon that said, "I'm doing absolutely nothing for AIDS except this." He's currently actually has a forthcoming book, Seismic Shift, The Collision of the Art World in the Real World in the Late 20th Century. And we had another person, Frank Garvey. I don't know if anybody here remembers Frank Garvey. I'm seeing some laughs. He was the director of the robotic Omni Circus, which included a robotic prostitute, which caused a little bit of controversy. He currently has a GoFundMe campaign to buy an RV. That's where you get with robotic prostitutes. Heidi Kamau worked at the intersection of cinema, sculpture, theater, technology, is currently a professor at the Stamps School of Art and Design at the University of Michigan, and along the way she collected a Guggenheim and a Creative Capital grant. The other one was Michael Motion. He was a genius. He was a MacArthur genius. He was a genius juggler. We had a genius juggler, and he was juggling so many things that he never actually managed to show up. So we had to cut his funding. And I think that helped the studio go into the black a little bit. And I looked him up. I couldn't find much about him other than that he was involved with Cirque du Soleil and Pallabilis, but his daughter's wedding was covered in the New York Times. Partially, I think, because his father-in-law and her grandfather was Norman Mailer, although I'm sure it was a very lovely ceremony, too. So the Microsoft Foundation was supposed to be an ongoing grant every year. We were supposed to get this large amount of money. And then we heard that Bill Gates decided creativity had nothing to do with his business model. I would have loved to have been in that meeting. Would you? It's like, as creativity, we just steal things. Anyway, on a personal note, I would like to just say that it was a very tumultuous time, but all the sweat and labor was certainly worth it. It had tremendous influence, actually, on my own work. The Critical Art Ensemble framed ideas for an animation I made called Tender Bodies. We did an NEA grant to host a conference on collectives, and working with Sub Rosa and the Carbon Defense League and the other collectives were the basis for another project I did called End of Code, about gendered subversive collectives battling each other to control traffic in a city that looked a lot like Pittsburgh. Just to end up, I just want to say that that time was a tremendously fertile creative time, and it continues to be that way. And I was honored to be a part of it and push the studio down the road a little bit further toward this anniversary, and especially to be associated with so many amazing, creative, interesting people. It was a fantastic experience, and it continues, and I hope it continues for many, many more years. So thank you.
Thank you, James. I'd now like to introduce Marge Myers, who was the Associate Director of the studio for 20-some-odd years, Marge? 23 years. And she was the Associate Director before Tom Hughes, many of you whom you know, and retired in 2015.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to read because I want to stay within my time frame. So, as mentioned, I was hired in 1991, and I came from the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, where I was a bureaucrat, and I just want to say, I was a really good bureaucrat. So I had art in the title and everything, but I was not, whatever. I didn't fit here, really, at all. So I had read stuff about the studio in preparation for the interview, and I will tell you, it didn't make any sense to me at all. I didn't recognize half of the words in the descriptions. So during the interview with Lowry and Brian Rogers, Lowry, maybe you'll remember this, maybe you won't. I just remembered, it is really burned in there. I said, okay, this is a great place. I mean, the CMU has great reputation and the CFA and everything. But what is the studio really about? Is it about art? No, Lowry said, no. Well, is it about artists? No. Well, faculty then, it's about the faculty. No. Well, the students. Oh, no. It's about creative inquiry. Oh, okay. So that was the beginning of the, you know what I mean, this issue of like, what the heck is it anyway? So then I decided, well, I got the job. I don't know why, but I did. And I had to make it my mission to figure out what I was supposed to do. And thanks to Jennifer, I can't tell you how many times she saved my life, literally. But anyway, the other thing that I want to point out is when Lowry and Brian both said it's about creative inquiry, they didn't say it like professorially. You know, it was like, it's about creative inquiry. It's like, it's about creative inquiry! They were so excited, they were so happy, they were so thrilled to be doing what they were doing. And I can tell you, I think they cooked this. You know what I mean? They were brewing it for a long time. So they were really happy. Okay, so then you fast forward a little bit. Jennifer and I are working really hard. We were charged with writing a project description for every project that the studio was doing. Yeah. Okay. The artists were supposed to help. It was torture. It was literally torture. Some of them took more than a year or two to complete, don't you think? Am I right? Okay. All right. So, I mean, it's all wonderful. You've heard this. These were all true things that everybody said. So I don't want to paint a dark picture. I just want to show you how hard it was. Okay. So in my job description, it said I was supposed to create an environment conducive to creativity. That's my job description. So, with the help of Jennifer, of course, because all that takes little logistic things, like everybody had to have a key. So then there had to be rules, because we didn't want everybody in the world coming in to this creative environment. And the technology, you know, Golan described sort of what the space looked like and what the technology was, you know, the CRTs and the little cubicles and all that stuff. None of that is what most, I mean, they used it, but they had a list, everybody had a list this long about what they really needed. So we had to get our act together, me and Jennifer, and we went shopping everywhere. We met with almost every arts organization in Pittsburgh. We met with every office, every department, faculty members, anybody who would give us a minute. And of course, well, what did we have to do when we went in to talk to these people? We had to describe creative inquiry and our organization and what we were supposed to be doing. It was very difficult. But here's what happened, basically. Most everybody that we met with said no at first. No, we don't do that. No, we don't have that. We can't have, no. CMU already has too much. Why are they asking us for anything? Dance floors, there's just, I can't even begin to tell you all the stuff that we had to get together. But anyhow, then it was my job, and Jennifer's too, to go to the artists and say, well, they said no. Sorry, we can't do it. Now, here's the key about the Studio for Creative Inquiry and the artists. Saying no to these great artists is like waving a red flag in front of a bull. Like, look out, oh my God. They don't hear that, they don't see that, they just go. And that's the strength of the studio. That's what makes it buzz, is the no, and the ignoring the no, or going beyond the no, or going above the no, or going beside the no, or going around it. And I mean, I didn't know that. I did not know that's what artists did. I really didn't. So all of you, most of you are artists. Most of the directors are artists. Thank you. I mean, thank you from the bottom of my heart teaching me that. It has gotten me through so many things in my life to know that. And here I am. I don't know how it happened. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Marge. There was a period of time when there was no director officially of the studio, and Marge and Jennifer Brodt kept it running really on fumes in some ways, and for a long time. It was owing to her service and Jennifer's that the studio also exists. It's my pleasure now to introduce Roger Dannenberg, who is still here as a professor. Roger, come on up, tell a story.
Thank you. I'm going to read as well. There's so much to say in so little time, but as you know, the studio space began as a library with all these bookcases surrounding us and was later used as a gallery. I was appointed technical director of the organization you heard about, the Center for Art and Technology, and spent a lot of time there. Looking back, the thing I remember most is the people that I worked with, especially on the piano tutor project, which was the first intelligent tutor to teach psychomotor skills, and it was way ahead of its time. One of the people, I just wanted to mention one person that worked on that project was John Maloney, who I met, and he was working on a PhD at the University of Washington, but really still searching for his true calling. And I was able to bring him into the Center for Art and Technology to work on a piano tutor, which he loved, and we still talk about it. Later, John joined Alan Kay's research group and still later became one of the main forces behind Scratch, which has been used for creative programming by millions of young people. You might also be amused to learn that Steve Jobs spent some time in the very same room. Much like John, he was somewhat lost and looking for something to do with his life after his first stint at Apple. And creativity was a real priority when he set out to build the next machine to be the next generation of campus computing, largely based on what he learned from Carnegie Mellon. So I've kept up with many other people, including Peter Capell and one of the first leaders, Phil Miller, and I think you'll agree that the space has been home to an amazing collection of people, and I'm proud to have been at least a small connection to all of this great work. Thank you.
Our next presenter is Hyla Willis. Hyla is a professor of media arts at Robert Morris University nearby. Before this, she was a long while ago, I guess not that long, but an MFA student in the School of Art and one of the co-founders of the cyber-feminist collective Sub Rosa, which was born in the studio circa 1998 to 2000. Please, Hyla.
It's a little bit daunting to be up here when there's so many people who've been involved with Sub Rosa over the years. So picture, if you will, it's the late 90s. I'm going to tell, my story is about the institutional hammer of censorship coming down on Sub Rosa in a way that now it just gives us pause to think about where we were then and where we are now. And we can laugh about it a little bit, so it's not too tragic of a story. So a sprightly Brian Rogers insists that visiting artist Faith Wilding do a sex education project touching on biotechnology. And feisty Faith Wilding insists that her newly minted studio residency begins as a sprawling 20-plus person feminist reading and research group. And at this time, there's all kinds of tech happening on campus, and the tartan is chock full of these ads looking for long-haired, pleasant, cheerful tennis players to be willing egg donors to hopeful families. So that's kind of the backdrop of Sub Rosa. And some of our earliest work was making pamphlets and newsletters and handing them out. And we were playing a little bit fast. You can see Carrie Schneider, Anna Scarbeck, Lucia Sommer. There's all kinds of people involved in this. The photo is by Beth Minoyan. And so we had a leaflet to hand out, and Brian called Faith in and said, this absolutely cannot go out with this language on it. If you're going to use that phrase, you cannot put the studio's name or CMU's name, not even the email address. We were playing really fast and loose with tactical media, and one of the things that we promised on our first manifesto was cyber feminist sneak attacks. And there was something at that time that was a very triggering language. Now keep in mind, this is before Homeland Security and TSA, before 9/11, before YouTube, before Friendster. Our web URL was artsnet.org/subrosa. And we argued a lot about whether to comply or not. I think we ended up doing a little bit of a happy medium where one of the flyers we did censor, and then another one we struck out CMU's reference, and we did both. It mattered not one whit that this very same flyer was distributed at Harrisburg and overseas at the Next 5 Minutes conference in biohazard bags. So this was interesting to think back. Anyway, that's my story. And it's really been an honor and a privilege to be even like a tiny part of the studio. And I have to thank early, strong Sub-Rosa champions, Bob Bingham, Jim Duesing, and Marge Myers, who helped a lot, and it really would never have grown the way that it has without them. So thank you.
I'm pleased to introduce my close colleague, Rich Pell, who's an associate professor in the School of Art and also an alum who was a student here back in the early days.
I like to think that I'm the youngest old-timer here. I first walked into the studio 23 years ago when I was a sophomore, and it absolutely blew my mind because there was all these art projects happening, but none of them looked like art. You know, not to like, you know, my sophomore brain anyway. You know, Lowry's got his virtual reality, you know, walkthrough of the pyramids at Giza. There was all this kind of stuff happening, and each one provided kind of an object lesson on like what art could be. You know, that art can happen in space. It can happen, you know, through ecology. It can happen through robotics. But the thing that was amazing then, and I went on to work on a bunch of these projects in the studio, is still amazing about the studio, which is that these huge interdisciplinary projects don't just have artists working on them. They're like led and created by artists. And anyone else who's lucky enough to work on those is working kind of for art, which is still kind of insane. It's totally insane. So Golan asked me to dig up an artifact, maybe from those times, and I went kind of rummaging around through my files, and I came up with an artifact from what I would arguably, you know, was my generation's you know, greatest existential threat that we faced, right? So, you know, around about 20 years ago, I think we all know what I'm talking about. But out of an abundance of caution, Carnegie Mellon chose to shut down the campus for 4 days and only allow, you know, important personnel, whatever they called it. So I decided, and they were going to issue like badges if you weren't important personnel. So I used my appointment at the Studio for a Creative Inquiry to make sure I got one of those badges. So I brought it today. I have my very own Y2K Year 2000 Bug Security Pass from the Studio for Creative Inquiry.
Thank you, Rich. It's my pleasure to introduce Madeline Gannon. Madeline was a student here as a master's student in Masters of Tangible Interaction Design, and then a doctoral student in the School of Architecture. She was also a fellow and artist in residence in the Studio for Creative Inquiry as in developing her robotics project. Madeline Gannon.
Yes, as Golan hinted at, I've had a pretty long history with the studio, as long as my time in Pittsburgh, actually. And I feel really grateful to have the opportunity, really just to say thank you for all that the studio has done for me in helping me mature and flourish into a burgeoning career across the arts, technology, and sciences. So I started off in one of Golan's classes, actually. That was the very first thing that I did here. And very doughy-eyed. I didn't know how to program even at the time. I didn't tell you that, but I was trying to learn on the fly. And lo and behold, over time, I decided after the master's to stay for a PhD. And what it turned out was that what I really wanted to do for a lot of my research was not deemed as valuable use of departmental resources. And so I found impediment after impediment to sort of want to explore our future with robots in a way that was really just not deemed valuable. And one day, I was sort of venting my frustration to Golan, and he sort of just like cleared off a desk in the lab upstairs and said, "This is your new lab, welcome home." So the studio for me was really like an orphanage. As a black sheep of my department, I found a home, not only the physical infrastructure, but also the collection of other black sheep that find their way to that space. And it's that valuable community that was really, really meaningful to me, and something that I was missing for 2 or 3 years prior to stumbling into the studio and making a home there. So I'm so grateful for the opportunity to have had this space. As I matured from student to artist in residence to research fellow to making it my own studio out of here, the studio and Tom and Golan were really instrumental in helping me professionalize and actually helping me hatch out of the studio and into the world to begin to impact it in meaningful ways. And I'm incredibly grateful and happy to be here. Thank you.
I'm thrilled to introduce Nathan Martin, who's the co-founder of Deeplocal. Of course, Deeplocal is Pittsburgh's premier creative technology firm, and we have a wonderful and long relationship because Nathan was for 7 years resident in the studio after finishing his bachelor's degree here in School of Art.
So I just have a very simple story and a very simple thank you. So I think I had the pleasure, like Rich, of kind of walking into the studio sophomore, junior year of college and kind of getting familiar with it. And then kind of through kind of weird steps, I ended up back with Rich in grad school and kind of had no idea what I was doing there. And I spent my grad school time developing mapping software, and it kind of dawned on me towards the end of my MFA that I had no clue what I was going to do after that MFA. And it dawned on me as well that maybe the studio would be a home to me. So I reached back out to the studio, and I can still remember the call from Marge on the phone telling me that I did have a place to go and I did have a home and there was a place that would accept what I was doing as art, because I had no other way of finding that acceptance. So I think much like Madeline, I felt like I found a home. I found support in Marge. I spun that into 3 years, not 7, but 3 years, which is a long amount of time to kind of stretch a 1-year residency. And then managed to spin a company out of the studio as well with the support of Marge again. Even bought my first house with a mortgage that got approved because Marge lied about how much money I made. So I have a lot of thank you to Marge in particular for your support.
I will or not say that we still provide that service. I'm thrilled to introduce Claire Hentschker, a recent graduate of the Masters of Tangible Interaction Design, and before that, from our School of Art, Claire Hentschker.
Hi, everybody. So the story that I want to tell you is about Normal, the cat. And this story starts, like a lot of stories started in the Studio for Creative Inquiry, kind of late at night, maybe during finals week, and everyone's like a little bit stressed, sort of acknowledging each other, but doing that like echolocation style communication where you're like, yeah, like I hear you, but I can't really pay attention, but you're there. And Tatiana came in with half of a hamburger and a little bundle of fabric, and in that little bundle of fabric was a kitten, and apparently Tatiana had been sitting outside eating her dinner, and a stray kitten had come up to her who was like tired and sick and cold. So Tatiana, being the person that she is, shared her dinner with this kitten, who then subsequently did not leave her alone. So where do you go when you have a kitten, it's cold, and you don't know where to go? You need people who will help you. You go to the Studio for Creative Inquiry. And so Tatiana shows up. Immediately, we all put aside our work because this has now become exponentially more important. And we start what is truly an interdisciplinary beehive of activity. Step one was we had to harness our experimental capture powers to say, how do you photograph a tiny kitten? It absorbed so much light, so we had to make sure we had like a custom lighting rig to take a picture of it. We had a dollar bill for scale, and then use these pictures to post online. Thank you, Shar, for communicating with the rest of the internet and like using social media for good to empower us to share out this picture and say, does anyone own this kitten? Turns out, no. So, okay, now it's getting a little bit late and we realize we need to figure out what to do with this kitten because we want to get some sleep because we have finals coming up. So the wonderful Caroline Record offers her house as a place to store this cat, who we then named Normal Cat after the vectors that come out of a plane, because if you visualize them on a 3D model, it starts to look like fur, and it was a little furry cat. So Caroline Record says, okay, I will house this cat temporarily, but we had no way of taking it home. It was just in this bundle. So this is where it really came in handy that we had a room full of architects, engineers, art students, and design students, because we built a glorious cat house with a modular tray made out of sanitary napkins and blankets, a roof that could open and close and be laced up to be 1 part strap and 1 part cattail, because also the box was part cat themed to make Normal the cat feel more comfortable. And I'm pretty sure by the end of the night it had like a custom LED lighting rig just in case Normal was afraid of the dark. And we really harnessed all of our creative inquiry skills to pull this off. And I think I love this story so much because Caroline took the cat home and then sent us a message a couple weeks later that said, "Hello there. I would just like to take a minute to update you about my darling little Normal. She's sitting next to me, purring like a little motorboat. She had a full workover at the vet and is 100% healthy and is now happily integrated with the other cats. So she kept Normal." And I love this story so much because, like Normal the cat, a lot of us ended up in the studio because we couldn't quite find ourselves at home anywhere else. I just wanted to take this moment to say that environments like that don't happen by accident. They're the result of really hard and sometimes invisible work done by people like Carol, Linda, Tom, and Golan. On behalf of the studio alumni, as we become integrated into the larger cat or human world, I just want to say we'll always be so grateful for the place that gave us a home when we needed one. Thank you to the Studio for Creative Inquiry for always taking in strays.
Thank you, Claire. It's now my pleasure to introduce Lowry Burgess, Dean Emeritus, Professor Emeritus, and co-founder of the Studio for Creative Inquiry, along with Brian Rogers. I'm just going to take a moment. A blessing.
Well, first of all, I wanted to give a little bit of history. As you might not know, where does the idea for the studio come from? It comes from a man named, a Hungarian artist named Yuri Kepes. Kepes, K-E-P-E-S. And he created the Studio for Creative Inquiry, he created the Center for Advanced Visual Studies at MIT in 1967. And he's the person who gave the vision of the idea of the interactions, the free interactions between art, science, and technology, the idea of collaboration, the idea of art and the environment, and the idea of art in the social environment. So all those 4 fundamental ideas come from him. And his name Yuri Kepes. And I spent 30 years with him in his life till he died. And he was a most remarkable man. And so I wanted to give you that piece of history. Now, before I came to Carnegie Mellon, I was at the CAVS at MIT for 19 years. And there I did some interesting projects, but the most important one was called Centerbeam. And it's considered in Europe the most important artwork of the century, this last century, not this one. So I wanted to lay that before you. And the other thing is that what is important to me now is, and you'll see, is Moonarch, which I've worked on for 10 years, with a most remarkable team of people, 300 people, 46 institutions, all artists working to further art, using art to advance science and technology. So whole new science, whole new arts, and whole new material science, cognitive science has been invented for the moon arc. So I wanted to emphasize that art can drive creativity in all sections, in all disciplines. So I've seen it. And we have this most remarkable project in the studio called Moonarch. And there's a big website you can see. The other thing is that when I came to Carnegie Mellon in 1989, I needed to open the doors of CFA. And I began the Niches project, the sculpture outside, all those were just blocks of stone when I came. Now they're carved and considered the most important stone project in the 20th century. So that was outside. Inside, I wanted to do something to open again, which was found the studio. So Brian and I were close friends from MIT, and so we decided to get together and get the studio going. And it's been happening ever since, and all of you are testimony to that. So my blessing on you and on the studio comes from a great symphony called the Symphony of 1000 by Gustav Mahler. Does everybody know it or not? It's the most unbelievable, massive, gorgeous symphony imaginable. And it has a pain in it based on the blessing that I want to give is the Vieni Creator Spiritus, which is Vieni Creator Spiritus, splendens tuorum visita, in plei superna gratia, quae tu creasti perpetua. Now, what does that mean? For those of you who don't know the liturgy, it's an ancient liturgical work that says, it begs for the creative spirit to come upon us and spread his splendor upon us eternally. So that's my blessing on the studio, that it might be creative beyond belief and eternally present.
Thank you so much, Lowry. So before we adjourn, just a couple quick announcements. 3 tiny but important announcements. First of all, I wanted to announce that the studio has a brand new website for the first time in a decade. So please have a chance to check it out. Hundreds of projects that have been in arrears and undocumented are now online. It's really an important change. If you were wondering when's Golan going to put up my project, it's probably there now or close to it. Secondly, I wanted to say with gratitude that we now have a new person who's joined the studio, Bill Rogers. So it's the first major significant full-time person who's joined the studio in quite some number of time, quite some years. So it's just a great addition to the very small staff we have. And finally, I wanted to announce that we now have a new directors fund, which a very generous sponsor in the dean has pledged a match. So if you wished to donate to the studio to make more weird things happen into the future, help students or faculty or artists in residence come and realize interesting new kinds of creative opportunities and be a part of being culture operators for the 21st century, please consider giving, perhaps at the end of the year or even soon, because it's on our website. And finally, I wanted to just welcome you all to Intersections, which is our 30th anniversary retrospective exhibition. It's just opening just now at the Miller ICA, and I will warmly welcome you all there, and I can't wait to see you. So please enjoy the work, and thank you so much, all of you, for coming.